Questions of Doom.
Hello and welcome back to another
Questions of Doom!
In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but as you'll also see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope that the answer is not only useful to the person who's asked the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. Now, today's question of doom is something which sort of touches on one of my favourite things in life, and that is films and also sci-fi films. And it's actually a very interesting question. It's one that I don't know, it's always sort of been in the back of my mind, I guess, but I've never really crystallised it myself. It goes as follows. Hello! I was watching Ridley Scott's Prometheus last night. Pretty good film. Hopefully the next one will tie it in with the Aliens trilogy a bit better. I don't want to spoil the plot, but in that movie a team of humans are sent into space to investigate aliens. Okay. A key part of their team is the archaeologists. Why? If archaeologists only study, or specifically study, humanity and human history, why would archaeologists have any interest in going into space? Is this just bad sci-fi? Bad writing, I guess. Your thoughts would be appreciated. Cheers, Rudy. I think that's how you say your name anyway. Well, Rudy, and like I say, hopefully I'm not butchering your name, you ask a very good question. This question is interesting on a number of levels, because it not only touches on, as you say, the definition of archaeology, the definition essentially being to do with the fact that we study humans and the things that they've left behind, but also as well on how actually people see archaeology from the outside, in particular in this instance screenwriters, novelists, people who write computer game plots, and this kind of thing. And in so many films, as you say, archaeologists are first responders to certain crises, especially when we're dealing with another culture, another society. So we see it hinted at in Indiana Jones' Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Indy is taken out to see the Roswell incident crash. We see it in Alien vs Predator. That's another film from that sort of franchise, I guess, where archaeologists are involved in that, but that's because there's a pyramid which appears on a heat bloom in Antarctica. As you say, in Prometheus, archaeologists apparently uncover some wall art pointing to this system way out into space. But the thing is, this wall art is dated to a time when that particular part of the world would have been completely uninhabitable. So they didn't do their research all that well, the screenwriters. And again, I suppose that's kind of the hint, is that archaeologists are a good catch-all, you know. And so if you don't really know what archaeology is, if you don't really, to be honest, care what archaeologists do, then they're a really good sciencey, humanities-y plug-in to a story, and it can add some semblance of credence to what you're talking about, I suppose, in a plot. But that's me being cynical, you know. Let's assume that archaeologists are being chosen not just because people misunderstand archaeology or because they have that sort of Indiana Jones understanding background, but because they actually are quite a good choice. And the reason for this, I think that the reason why that they are quite a good choice is because archaeologists come in all shapes and sizes, both literally and figuratively. You know, you have men and women, you have young and old, you have healthy and unhealthy. You have, in terms of their specialisms though, more to the point, everything from an understanding of architecture to biology, to microbiology, to psychology, to landscape science, to ice cores, to environmental science, to the minutiae of a certain technology on a particular subcontinental, you know, part of the world. The point is there's a branch of archaeology that will be helpful on almost any in almost any walk of life, and if it's not directly helpful, then those experts will be able to transfer their skills fairly quickly. I've talked in the past in other videos about how archaeologists, for example, go on to have careers in the medical profession, for example. So you know, if you study skeletons, you might be really good at working an MRI scanner, depending on how your research has gone and what your career is. So my point is that actually archaeologists might be a really good choice because of our adaptability and because of our wide range of knowledge. So, if we put that cynical point of, oh, they just don't know what they're talking about when they're writing these things to one side, maybe that is a reason. Maybe this isn't just bad sci-fi. Perhaps realistically, archaeologists would be used on these first contact missions to try and understand, especially in the context of Prometheus, because these aliens are apparently where the roots of humanity come from. If we've been studying humanity's history, then understanding its roots may be actually just a short jump beyond the realm of an archaeologist. So perhaps that's why they're there. Perhaps it's because archaeologists are a good choice. The other thing as well that I find interesting about the representation of archaeology in sci-fi is this idea of Xeno-Archaeology. And this is something that you touched on in your email. You said if archaeologists specifically study humanity and human history. Well, in lots of sci-fi, archaeologists don't. I'm thinking about, for example, in Doctor Who, there's like a Xeno-Archaeology. Professor Song, River Song is not only studying people, but also, it's hinted, is studying other societies and other times and places and cultures and this kind of thing. In Star Trek, a much more sober form of sci-fi, Captain Jean-Luc Picard's hobby, I suppose, or his sub-career, is an archaeologist. He is a Xeno-Archaeologist as well. I think in at least one episode, he goes off on his captain's yacht to go and do some archaeological digging at one point. And this is, I suppose, what interests me in that realm is that actually a reasonable extension of archaeology? Is it reasonable that archaeologists would move beyond just looking at people on Earth to looking at people on other planets and then eventually other species? And I think actually that is quite reasonable. After all, archaeology bleeds very, very smoothly into evolutionary anthropology, which in itself bleeds into all sorts of other interests in different species. And I suppose on a more literal sense, actually, archaeologists are specifically interested in human beings because human beings are the only species on this planet which do the combination of things which we do. We build, we have language, we have music, we have food which is cooked. We have what we call culture. And so actually, if an archaeologist is defined more closely to the sort of, I suppose, the American broader definition of an anthropologist, then actually there's no reason really why Xeno-Archaeology, the study of other sentient, culturally active beings, couldn't sort of come into our realm of interest. So that's another element actually. Not only might archaeologists be useful on these missions, but also actually archaeologists' interests, our innate field of interest, what gets us up in the morning, may actually lead us onto these missions innately because we want to see what other sentient cultures and beings are doing. There's the other element here as well, and that is that the study of aliens and alien societies may offer a glimpse, I suppose, as to how we came to be, if you know what I mean. There are lots of features that we see in the natural world. For example, the fins on the backs of sharks and dolphins are the result of convergent evolution. These two species aren't very closely related, as far as I'm aware. I may be getting that one wrong, but the point is you can have similar features turn up because they are simply the best features honed by similar environments. And so maybe by looking at an alien society which is living on a similar planet to our own, which has similar, continental, political, geopolitical, water, this kind of thing makeup. Perhaps we can better understand how the shape of our society came to be by studying the shape of that society, by studying its convergent points and also its divergent points as well. So that's another argument for why archaeologists might be interested in Xeno-Archaeology, in alien archaeology, as it were. Now, in the real world, and this is where we take a step away from science fiction, science fact is that actually there are now people who are making use of, I suppose the first step into this science fact would be making use of space technology to study archaeology. The most famous example of this would be Sarah Parcak, who was using satellites orbiting the planet to make studies of landscapes, for example, in Egypt or South America or wherever, places across the world. to better understand potential archaeological sites, and also the context of known archaeological sites. LiDAR is at the moment being used in I think is it Cambodia to understand the jungle and the relationship to ruins there. And also recently, actually, I think the LiDAR survey of Britain became open data, so anyone can access it. Now, I know that's not strictly speaking space technology, but it's a similar principle, this idea of scanning from space, almost, or scanning from height, from altitude. So actually, already people are starting to use space and use the term space archaeology to describe this way of doing archaeological research. And actually, I've in the past I've actually interviewed an archaeologist, but someone who specialises in geophysics, who wants to go to Mars, which is again, it just sort of proves that archaeologists are already kind of wanting to get out there and do something interesting, to apply their earthbound, human-seeking techniques and methodology to other planets. And in the case of, what was his name? You have to go to the Meet the Archaeologist playlist, and Dave the Grave Hunter, is it? So anyway, check it out. He's there, and that's a guy who really does actually want to go into space. And actually, once that happens, and indeed it has already happened in the case of the moon, archaeological sites will be in space. And this is the next step into science fact as opposed to science fiction, is that the moon landings, plural, the different moon landings which have happened, the reflectors which were left on the moon, the moon buggy, this kind of thing, the flags that are there, these are archaeological artifacts and archaeological sites already in space. So yeah, it's actually increasingly close to us, and if there is a Mars mission in my lifetime, which I've been told ever since I was in primary school, then the moment they touch down, that's archaeology. In fact, arguably, the fact that we have sensors and things like the crashed Beagle, the Mars rover, all these things which are on Mars, indeed on meteors. In fact, we've got what was it called? I'll put the name on screen. We have sensors and satellites on all other stellar objects. It means that they are also archaeological sites. Artifacts, man-made, human-made artifacts, are already out there in space, and that is very cool. But I suppose the question is, and this is where we take a step back from science fact into a sort of a science parallelism. The question is, how do we actually more broadly prepare for this Xeno-Archaeology? Well, initially, I suppose, for literally space archaeology, so human-made artifacts and human sites and human colonies on other planets. How do we prepare for that? But also, how do we prepare for potentially meeting whole other sentient species? How do we begin to understand how to analyze, for example, a settlement created by something which is not human, which has never seen Earth? And that is where, like I say, in this sort of parallel world, a very interesting tool has just become available. Controversially, not as rounded as it could have been, but nonetheless a very interesting tool, and that is the computer game No Man's Sky. Now, this is something which actually we discussed in another interview that I did not that long ago with a guy called Andrew Reinhard, so check that interview out as well. In fact, I'll put links to both of those interviews I've mentioned at the end of this video. That's convenient, so they'll pop up at the end. But in that, actually, Andrew was very much looking forward to No Man's Sky, because it's a procedurally generated universe. Essentially, at its most ideal, this game universe has just been set in motion with a series of physical laws and certain constants, certain variables, and yet every planet has evolved along its own lines. And there's something like, is it 13 quintillion or 18 quintillion? It's some ridiculous number of planets estimated. And on these different planets, sometimes people are finding structures which were not obviously made by people. They were made, in that sense, by the computer, but with that planet's own rules. So therefore, by a culture which we haven't yet met. And so people like Andrew and some other archaeo gamers are actually using these planets that they visit as test beds for precisely this sort of thing, precisely meeting and experimenting and experiencing archaeologies, more than one archaeology I suppose, that go beyond the human realm, go beyond the earthbound realm, and go beyond what we would consider to be normal or easily interpreted. Now, there are all sorts of arguments about whether or not a human-made construct, i.e. a computer game, can truly produce something which is actually, you know, alien and different. But the point is, this is a test bed. It's a very good play pit. It's a sand pit. It's the training end of the swimming pool, which some people are currently dabbling in. And if I had a good enough computer, I would also be dabbling in No Man's Sky. So yeah, oddly enough, Rudy, your question sort of supposes, I think quite rightly, that often screenwriters don't really know what they're doing when they plonk an archaeologist into their script, especially in a sci-fi film. It's because archaeology is seen as an adventurous pursuit, as a scientific pursuit, as a humanities pursuit, and as a pursuit which has lots of you know, fudgeability. They can mess around with it for plot purposes. But putting that to one side, I think actually there are lots of good arguments for having archaeologists involved in space archaeology, and who knows, hopefully within my lifetime, we'll be seeing human archaeological sites on other planets, and maybe eventually we'll even discover archaeological sites made by other species. Anyway, hopefully this has been a useful answer to your question. I've certainly enjoyed thinking about this one, and actually the next question of Doom is with regards to desk-based assessments, but I wanted to take my time and answer that one correctly, you know, really properly, so I'll be doing that after I get back from the wedding this weekend. But thank you again, Rudy, for your question. It's been a real pleasure, and if anyone else out there has any thoughts or comments, please do comment below to add to this conversation. I'm certainly interested to continue it, and I'm sure Rudy would like to take a look as well. So once again, thank you, Rudy. As ever, guys, until next time, whatever you get up to, do take care. Bye bye.